It was so fascinating watching Democrats criticize President Trump's announced plans to withdraw troops from Syria. Republican criticism, I get. Democrats?
On the actions taken by the President of the United States in relationship to Syria. An action that was taken without the benefit of the thinking of our national security establishment.
And Congresswoman Maxine Waters issued this statement. The Kurds have been a reliable ally to the United States against the ISIS terrorists in Syria. If the United States abandons the Kurds, these courageous allies will never trust us again. Trump's betrayal of the Kurds is a gift to Russia, Iran, and ISIS. End of quote. Now, where were all these nouveau neocon liberals when President Obama pulled all the troops from Iraq against the advice of, as Nancy Pelosi put it, the, quote, national security establishment, end of quote.
As a candidate for president, I pledge to bring the war in Iraq to a responsible end. For the sake of our national security, a few hours ago I spoke with Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki. I reaffirmed that the United States keeps its commitments. He spoke of the determination of the Iraqi people to forge their own future. We are in full agreement about how to move forward. So, today, I can report that, as promised, the rest of our troops in Iraq will come home by the end of the year.
Now, that move was applauded by much of the media, Democrats, and of course, Joe Biden.
We have faith that the Iraqi troops that our sacrifices have allowed to be trained are in fact ready and will be increasingly capable of providing total security for this country by the end of next year.
The aforementioned Maxine Waters. As the war in Iraq draws to a close, it is my hope that this conflict will serve as a solemn reminder of the costs of war. We must carefully re-examine our approach to national security and how we view the United States' role in promoting international peace and security, end of quote. The aforementioned Nancy Pelosi.
It is because of our troops and the leadership of President Obama that this month we were able to say the war in Iraq is over, our troops are coming home.
But after the pullout, things went south, big time.
Down. Down here. Okay.
Never mind that the Iraqi Armed Forces Chief of Staff said the Iraqi army needs several more years to get ready.
Under the Obama administration's plans, US forces are due to start withdrawing from Iraq at the end of the month. But at a press conference in Baghdad today, Lieutenant General Babakir Zabari said the US Army must stay until the Iraqi army is fully ready.
Infantry, naval and air force capabilities will reach their good and excellent levels in 2020, which will enable it to work on all levels: infantry, naval and air force.
President George W. Bush warned against a rash and precipitous withdrawal from Iraq.
I know that Americans have serious concerns about this war. People want our troops to come home, and so do I. But no matter how frustrating the fight can be, and no matter how much we wish the war was over, the security of our country depends directly on the outcome in Iraq. The price of giving up there would be paid in American lives for years to come.
And warned.
I know some in Washington would like us to start leaving Iraq now. To begin withdrawing before our commanders tell us we're ready would be dangerous for Iraq, for the region, and for the United States. It would mean surrendering the future of Iraq to al-Qaeda. It'd mean that we'd be risking mass killings on a horrific scale. It would mean we'd allow the terrorists to establish a safe haven in Iraq to replace the one they lost in Afghanistan. It would mean increasing the probability that American troops would have to return at some later date to confront an enemy that is even more dangerous.
But Barack Obama's hands were tied, right? All Obama did was follow the agreement that George W. Bush had agreed to, and therefore he had no choice. When Joe Biden recently admitted that pulling out the troops from Iraq was a mistake, he blamed George W. Bush.
General Jim Mattis, in his book, referred to the Obama administration's decision to pull troops out of Iraq in 2011 as a catastrophic mistake. Was it?
Well, it was a mistake in the sense that the president asked me to draw down the 150,000 combat troops, and I was in charge of that. And I pled with the Iraqi government to allow a residual force to stay so we could stay and focused on then al-Qaeda before ISIS. But President Bush had made a deal with the Iraqis that all the forces would be out. We could not get the votes in the parliament to change it so that we would be able to, with permission, stay in the region.
Really, Joe? Really?
It's true that during the Bush administration, we entered into what's called a SOFA agreement, a status of forces agreement. It's something we have with a lot of countries around the world where we have U.S. forces deployed, Japan, for example, and so forth. And we spent months negotiating that SOFA agreement. It set certain timetables, one of which was that U.S. forces would be out of Iraq by the end of 2011. Now, we were focused, obviously, at the time. We had significant, this was back during the surge, significant combat forces in Iraq and so forth. But there was another provision in there that's very important that seems to have been ignored, which was that we would also reserve the right to negotiate with the Iraqis on some stay-behind forces. Would have to be another negotiation, but that the U.S. and Iraq would come to some agreement on leaving behind trainers or certain specialties or certain things we do very well with our military that the Iraqis don't do.
But if there was an agreement to negotiate a stay-behind force, why didn't the Obama administration negotiate with the Iraqis for a stay-behind force?
The politics of the last election have overwhelmed the effort that would be required to put together that kind of agreement with respect to Iraq. Now, Iraq is admittedly, they're a new democracy. They're not very well organized yet. They look a little bit like we did back in 1781, 82. And it's tough to negotiate those kinds of arrangements, but it can be done. And my concern is that we didn't make much of an effort this time around. This administration was bound and determined to get out no matter what.
Now, what about Obama's national security establishment? The Daily Beast is a center-left publication. Why the White House ignored all those warnings about ISIS? Team Obama was told over and over that the Iraqi army couldn't stop a terror group that was ready to pounce. But Washington was a prisoner to its paradox of an Iraq policy. It is simply not true that nobody saw a disaster like the fall of Mosul coming, said the man who served as senior advisor at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. I can't speak for anyone else, but I literally predicted this in verbal warnings and in writing in 2010 that Iraq would fall apart, end of quote. What about Obama's Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton? What was her advice? By all accounts, she was one of the people inside the administration who advocated for keeping a residual force in Iraq, end of quote. Leon Panetta served as Obama's Secretary of Defense and CIA head.
Back when you watched the Stars and Stripes being lowered for the last time in Baghdad, were you confident in that moment that pulling out was the right thing to do?
No, I wasn't. I really thought that it was important for us to maintain a presence in Iraq.
So Obama's Secretary of Defense wanted to stay behind force. His Secretary of State wanted to stay behind force. The head of his CIA wanted to stay behind force. What about the military? Ray Odierno, 4-star general, was top commander in Iraq, became Army Chief of Staff.
Did it ever have to begin? Was ISIS avoidable?
I think it is, and I'm not one for revisionist history. Actually, I was on 1 September 2010. That's when I gave up command in Iraq, and that was the end of. We declared that was the end of combat operations when I left.
Right.
And then in
what was the state of Iraq when we got out of there?
Yeah, so it was in great shape. Violence was down, the economy was growing, a fairly stable political system, although there were signs that maybe it wouldn't be so stable. So it was going well, and I think if we had stayed, I think it could have made a difference.
Finally, another example of Trump derangement syndrome. As you know, Trump has repeatedly criticized NATO for asking a lot and paying too little.
NATO has not treated us fairly, but I think we'll work something out. We pay far too much, and they pay far too little.
You know, we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting everybody, and yet we're paying a lot of money to protect. Now, this has been going on for decades. This has been brought up by other presidents, but other presidents never did anything about it because I don't think they understood it or they just didn't want to get involved. But I have to bring it up because I think it's very unfair to our country. It's very unfair to our taxpayer. And I think that these countries have to step it up, not over a 10-year period. They have to step it up immediately.
And Democrats hammered him.
But here's the deal. Think what that did. He turns around and he questions whether or not he'll keep the sacred commitment of Article 5 for the NATO members. If he is reelected, I promise you, there will be no NATO. Our security will be vastly underrated. We will be in real trouble.
But do you know who else criticized NATO? Biden's boss.
The situation in Ukraine reminds us that our freedom isn't free, and we've got to be willing to pay for the assets, the personnel, the training that's required to make sure that we have a credible NATO force and an effective deterrent force.
And Obama's first Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates.
Those who enjoy the benefits of NATO membership but don't want to share the risks and the costs. This is no longer a hypothetical worry. We are there today, and it is unacceptable.
But look at this. Guess who finally got NATO to start paying up? Donald J. Trump. The Telegraph. NATO members increased defense spending by $100 billion after Donald Trump called them delinquents. Washington Times. Donald Trump gets NATO members to spend more on defense. UPI. European NATO members to boost spending this year. I think Donald Trump calls that winning. I'm Larry Elder, and this has been the Larry Elder Show for Epoch Times.